Okay, so there's two types of evolution, right? We mentioned one. We have macroevolution, whereas an organism's becoming a totally new organism, right? I heard somebody put forth, oh yeah, the hippopotamus is a transition species between a whale, and eventually it's going to become a whale. Well, if we think about the environment of a hippopotamus, right, from Africa, relatively marshlands, Africa has major raining seasons. In certain parts of Africa, it is literally flooded. The whole place becomes water for somewhere from 6 to 9 months of the year, and that levels change and covering all of the ground. And so it would be helpful to have legs, right? In that time, they still have a lot of body fat to keep themselves warm in the water. That's their claim. They're becoming a transition species and stuff like that. Or is it the hippopotamus is just well adapted to its environment? So is the whale. Anyway, so that's macro, right? The large. Macro meaning big. Okay. All right. Micro is when we think of adaptation. Adaptation is a term put forward by Darwin, and it's well proven. Okay. Animals adapt all the time through over generation intervals. So it's an inherited trait that increases an organism's rate of survival. So in this scenario, if we take, say, these brown rabbits, and we'll talk here in a minute about the different things that will influence an environmental change. So anything that can influence an environmental change, it could be, a forced adaptation for natural selection, right? And can be a change to the environment through either the organism spreading to a new environment because the population's boomed, right? So they spread to a new environment and specialize there. It could be global warming, right? So the environment changes, and so they live in a region that had very little snowfall to now they have a lot of snowfall throughout the year. Or it can be an invasive species introduced, new organisms push them around or start to predate on them. So anything that changes and causes an influence and change in their environment. So say for example for these rabbits, right? We're gonna use them for an example. I have a brown rabbit, right? Environment changes for whatever reason, okay? And there's a lot more snow throughout the year. So what happens? Who's gonna get eaten? The brown or the white rabbits? Right? It's gonna be the brown rabbits. And say the white rabbit is before the white rabbits were getting eaten most of the time, right? There was no snow. Whether this was a recessive or a dominant trait, all that really is going to affect is how fast it's going to change the phenotype. Remember what it looks like, not the genotype, but the phenotype of this population as a whole. When we talk about the gene pool, right? We're talking about all the genes in the pool. Okay, if we all jumped in a swimming pool, that'd be all the genes, all the genetic information in the pool, right? And they can mix up and all that kind of stuff, and I can pull out some individuals and take their genes with them and go to another pool and get in that pool with those people and their genes, okay? Don't go swimming in your genes, all right? Anyways, I keep those cheesy jokes in there for you guys. All right. So we back to our scenario, right? The white rabbits. So we get snow. So what's going to happen, right? More of the brown rabbits are going to start to be eaten, and more of the white rabbits are going to survive through natural selection, okay? And so they're going to get to reproduce, and so the adaptation of the organisms is more white rabbits, okay? And then we can see this in so many different examples. And honestly, Darwin's finches are a good example. The different islands, the birds are able to move to different regions. Well, the food sources have changed, and they're specialized in that area. But they're still rabbits, they're still finches, correct? That's the whole point I'm trying to get to here. And that's adaptation, and otherwise microevolution. So be careful. You'll hear the term evolution thrown around to do a lot of things for a lot of ulterior motives. We just got to be mindful of that, guys. Sorry, my nose itches, man. All right, so we already talked about the second bullet, the changes of environment that can affect, okay? But also the likeliness of a genetic mutation. So that's a good example of that. It's really hard to find a genetic mutation that's actually beneficial. Record stands for humans that most genetic mutations actually do not benefit. One, though, that we can kind of use and kind of explain this and relate to how much it really affects the population and organism as a whole is one with humans, actually, sickle cell anemia. So in Africa, there was a disease spread by mosquitoes that attacked the red blood cells and destroyed the red blood cells. And remember, form determines function, right? So regular blood cells round. Well, the sickle cell blood cell is shaped like a sickle, right? I'll draw you a picture. I'm trying to draw you a picture. All right, so we got a round. Pretend that's round. That's pretty close. Okay. Then we have a sickled cell. All right, so it's shaped like a sickle. Okay. So this was, it's hard to argue whether this is a random mutation or not, because it was a mutation that developed where it was needed, right? People are dying from this disease. It developed. If you have the sickle cells, you weren't dying from the disease, right? You can talk about some other research and how things have changed. But so if I have the sickle cell, I don't get affected by this disease, right? Now, but what can be the loss of the sickle cell? Okay, so you can't remember form-term dysfunction. So it's the same form that saved them, but because the form has changed drastically, the function that they were meant to has also decreased. They don't hold as much oxygen. That's why when you hear about certain football players who go play in certain regions or up altitudes, or people with sickle cell anemia, it really causes issues because the amount of oxygen they can carry, and hence the amount of oxygen they can move through the body, and yeah, it's like slowly suffocating. So it's a mutation, a change, but it changed at its own risk, not all being benefits. And so, but most mutations that we record are negative. And you can make the argument that the ones we don't record are because they're so subtle we don't realize that. But genetically speaking, that's really hard to measure, really hard to count for. Okay, let's keep going. Where are we at? We're almost done. All right, the next page. Man, this video's been long. Okay, here's another video. I'll talk about sexual selection. Go watch The Birds of Paradise. I'm gonna give you a little joke real fast. So y'all know in middle school, boys that don't know how to talk to girls, right? It's kind of funny to watch them. They're kind of like little cavemen. They go, oh, and they go there and they get close to her and they don't know how to talk to her. So they do. And what they do, they either hit her, or they pull her hair, or they do something funny, right? And they run off, and run away, right? Okay, that's your middle school boys, right? I always explain that when they can't talk to girls, they think it's cute. Okay, now high school boys. Birds of Paradise. That's my example for high school boys. Yep. They start dancing, start squawking to get the attention. They put on their little dance. Hey, look at me. I'm a pretty girl. I'm a pretty boy. Look at me. All that kind of stuff. Put on way too much cologne. All kinds of stuff. It's crazy. Anything to get your attention, right? So see that. So the Birds of Paradise, they develop because of sexual selection. The females are really selective of who they pick. Only like on one of the Birds of Paradise, only like 1 out of 10 males ever get to reproduce. That's just how picky the females are. Another one is the peacock, right? So, right, the male peacock, big, pretty plumage, right? Long tails compared to the female. Real beautiful bird, right? So, which one thing to remember is what eats peacocks? Tigers. The natural predator of peacock is a tiger. Okay? Let's think about this. You have this big, heavy tail. You're really not that much of a flying bird anyway. It's more of a jumping, lucky bird. That's what it is. Like an oversized turkey. And so what happens when the tiger comes to chase you? Who can't get away? The males can't get away. So the females have selectively picked pretty suckers. So yeah, so this is a selection that has grown and developed out of the desire of the females, right? But has led to a downfall to the survivability of the males. So it's kind of interesting, and it really adds tweaks to Darwin's theory of natural selection. And it's an important thing to remember. And one other thing we'll add to this, because I forgot to say it earlier, is when we're remembering that natural selection is about reproducing, it's not about surviving, okay? And one example of that is all the organisms, such as butterflies, after they lay their eggs, what do? They die, So, yeah, reproduction, man. All right. You know what? I'm going to pause here, and we'll come back and start part 2, 3, whatever.